Okay, are we all ready to continue? As you may have noticed, I have taken off my jacket. We're starting to work. So the talk about all this framework is over. We're talking about serious work now. Waiting for the last couple of people to join us. First of all, are there any questions before we continue, or whatever we heard so far? Anything you think you should know in order to understand what's going on going forward? Very clear. Thank you. Okay, you will still have chances to raise your questions at the end. So, or if there's something which absolutely does not make sense, please interrupt me. Okay, then I'll try and clarify it immediately. Right, before the break I said, before we can address risk, we must understand the risk. If we don't understand it, we cannot deal with it. You have various methods of identifying risk. One would be simple risk profiling. I talked about risk profile, remember? You can have this risk mapping, heat mapping, whatever way you want to do. Just go through it and say, do we have risk? Yes, no. How high? 1, 2, 3, high, medium, low, whatever. You can do a detailed risk assessment, saying what we have risk, do we have additional controls, do we have enough controls, or are the controls insufficient? And of course you check your events and analyze them. So something that has happened, you don't want it to happen again. So this is another way of addressing your risks, trying to understand your risk. If you do this properly, you will find that this will be a good guidance for you to either accept a risk, if you find, yes, we have a risk, but it is more expensive to have additional controls than the loss could have been, then you say, I can live with it, I accept it. Or you say, no way, I cannot live with this risk, I need to do something about it. So these are the two options you have after you have analyzed the risk. For this, we need something called a taxonomy. Everybody understand the word taxonomy? Well, you feel free to say no, because I didn't understand it when I first heard it. Okay, a taxonomy, the word comes from Greek, taxos, nomos. These are the two components. It is a way of classifying things. It first started in biology. The way you start classifying plants. Those with a stem, those with a high stem, a small stem, those with leaves, those with flowers, trees, bushes. All these things are classified into different groups. And you can go down the tree until you come to the very little plants that you're trying to describe. That's where the word taxonomy first was used. It is, of course, equally useful in other things, like in classifying risks or events. So, what you should have in the first place is a taxonomy. To know that you're all dealing with the same language, that you're all speaking the same language. And I don't mean Vietnamese or English. I mean the same word for the same meaning. It doesn't matter what you call it, as long as you all use the same word. I have been dealing with a broker in Switzerland who said that whenever they say this, the business uses a different word, so they cannot communicate with each other. Well, that's already bad, because you don't use the same taxonomy. So somebody has to change their use of language. Now, Basel II has a basic taxonomy in its risk categories, first and second level. However, that is an industry standard which goes back to 2002. It was basically J.P. Morgan who said, this is what we are using. And the Basel Committee said, well, great, thank you very much, and published it. That this is ours now, Basel. All of us, or most of us other banks were not quite happy with it, but the Basel Committee said, well, that's the way it is, finished. So the industry has better taxonomies than Basel II. Because Basel II taxonomy is often not clear. It's ambiguous. It could be this or that, or both. And that's, of course, not very useful. Sometimes it's just not consistent. So Basel II it's there, but there could be better ones. Risk business has a famous cube for that. They say there is always a risk point in 3 dimensions. You have risk categories across, which are similar to the Basel event categories. Then you have business functions along your processes. So what do you do? So you may have, for instance, in payment processes, you may have a risk in internal fraud, external fraud, systems breakdown. So it's 2 dimensions. And then the third one is, for which business are we, or for which product are we looking at these things? Different risk points can have a different effect on different businesses. For instance, if you look at external fraud in your customer relationship management, if you are a deposit-taking company, or like a savings or a private bank, your biggest risk is that you receive laundered money that is not clean. Okay, because the customer doesn't tell you the truth where the money is from. If you are a lender, your biggest risk is the customer does not tell you the truth about his financial situation. It's the opposite. He's trying to make himself look better than he actually is. So, completely different effects of the same risk point in different products. That's why the third dimension, the assessment entity or the business product. So, Basel II definition, it's not fantastic, but it's doable. Operational risk is defined as the risk of loss resulting from inadequate or failed internal processes, people and systems, or from external events. Now, we have level 1 risk categories: process risk, we have conduct risk, people, and we have external events. Now, if you look at this, internal processes. Who creates these processes? Who creates processes? People, right? Okay. Systems. Who builds systems? People. Okay. Who creates external events? Not people. All right, if you look at it, process risks and conduct risks is all about people. With the exception of external events that may hit you with a loss, all the rest is people-driven. So you can as well say, Operational risk is the risk of dealing with people. People failing, people misbehaving, people not doing what they should do. It's basically operational risk management. And therefore very, very difficult to quantify because it is very irrational. So, going back to taxonomy, why is it important? If you look at this, somebody enters an amount, instead of 1 million, enters 10 million in a payment. A zero too much. What is this? It is level 1, execution, delivery, process management, according to Basel II. Level 2, human processing error. But that's not good enough. It doesn't tell you exactly what happened. Then you say, what kind of processing? Transaction execution, data capture. And level 4, an accounting data entry error. So you have to narrow it down in the taxonomy to create exactly the point, what happened here. Anything above is hard to manage. The more precisely you can classify the event in these levels, the better your chance to effectively manage it. Process identification, similar thing. You want to know exactly what process. For instance, here we have origination as a main line. Then you say customer relationship management is what we're looking at. Now, customer relationship does various things. It looks at customer acquisition, it looks at ongoing maintenance management, it looks at sometimes at complaints from customers. It looks at various things. The job is not finished when you have the customer. So, but here we're talking, for instance, level 3, acquiring a new customer. Level 3, the second process is to get the customer actually on board. The customer said, yes, okay, let's talk, and you finally have him come and fill in all the forms and make him a customer. There's 2 processes there. And there's another one, perform your KYC, know your customer analysis, and your anti-money laundering checks. So you want to know exactly who the customer is before you sign the customer up. If you're not happy with the customer, don't take the customer. Tell him to find another bank. I've done that before. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. As a bank, you have the right to refuse to do business with anybody. If you're not comfortable with your client, tell your client to please go and pack up. It's not always a pleasant talk, but you have that right, and you should exercise it if you're uncomfortable. Okay, controls. Also for controls, you have a taxonomy. There are several types of controls. One is a detective control. So you find out later on when you start investigating. So something, did we do it, yes or no? But at that point it's already too late. Then you have a preventative control that is designed to catch a mistake before it becomes a loss. So that's probably the most effective control, preventative. Then you have oversight, what audit does, what compliance does. It's another way of finding things. A resolution response when you have business continuity, process recovery. But again, these are all things that are already dealing with losses or dealing with events. Planning, guidance, this is foresighted. You put your controls in place before you even start the process. And the governance, obviously, is your highest control. This is your constitution. Okay, we talked about identifying risks, creating a risk profile. One of the most common ones is the risk and control self-assessment. are different steps. Step 1, make sure that everybody knows what we're doing here. There's nothing worse than when you come to a workshop and people have a different idea. I was once conducting a RCSA, and one of the people who was in the audience, he was a senior IT person, he was under the impression we're talking risk indicators. So after 10 minutes he gets up and said, "This is rubbish, I'm leaving." I said, "Why? What?" He said, "No, I came here for key risk indicators, I didn't come here for risk profiling." I said, hold on. Risk indicators you can only apply when you know what your risks are. Otherwise, there's no point collecting data. So whatever your expectations were, they were wrong. So today, first we do risk profiling. So make sure they already know what they're coming for. Even then, you may not be popular for asking them to come. I've had that before, that people walk out at the end of the day and say, "You know, this morning I was quite upset because I had to come to this workshop. I have so much to do. But now I thought it was worthwhile." So what happened? They came and said, "Well, another risk management, blah, 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 all day long." And then they find, actually I can learn something here. And then they start thinking. So, a beginning to risk culture, they start thinking. That's important. So make sure that we already know what's going on, that we talk about the things the business unit does. Don't talk about things which is none of their concern, only what they actually do. Because otherwise they don't feel that they are responsible. They must feel that they are the owner of this process. Then you develop that risk profiles. You have risk categories across, and you have business functions down. And you go through the matrix every single point. Do we have a risk? Yes, no. If we have a risk, is it high, medium, low? And if you want, you can break it down one more time into high, medium, low within the 3 main high, medium, lows. So, for instance, I use a 9-point scale. So the first 3 are 1 to 3 is green, low risk, 4 to 6 is medium risk, and 7 to 9 is high risk. And already in that little box you can see there are clusters where you have higher risk than in other areas. Some areas are pretty low risk, and there are some clusters there which are pretty much higher risk. This one here you have a line of red practically, and that I believe that is execution of orders. You can have pretty high risk there if you don't do the things right. Okay, once you've done that, step 3. You know you have a risk, for instance, of internal fraud in payments. Let's take internal fraud in payments. So many different kinds of payments. Again, use your taxonomy, go down and say, where exactly is the problem? It's in manual payments, issuing checks. For people issuing checks, that is the internal fraud part that we're worried about. So identify the exact process, where is the weak link, and then say, what is the risk in that process? Put this to paper, not just we know what it is. Put it to paper, document it. And last but not least, say, do we have any controls against this? What are the controls? Document them. Document these controls. Go back one more time, sorry. The controls have the next step. If you're doing a good RCSA, you will look at the controls now and say, are my controls designed for this particular risk? They may be very good controls, but not for this risk. So that's the first analysis you do with controls. Second analysis is we know what the design is, but do they work? You don't talk to the people. You say, well, you have a 4 eyes principle. Somebody looks at the work the other person does before it's released. Does it work? And they will tell you, generally it works. So you know it's not 100%. So it works generally. So that's the other thing, does it actually work in the process? I have seen controls that were there, and when you talk to the people, does it work? They said, no, it doesn't. So what do you do? If the control doesn't work, what do you do? Scrap it. Abolish this control because it doesn't work. No point doing it. It just costs money. But then find a better control that works. Right. After this, you complete the detailed assessment. You make sure that everything is on paper, everything is documented, and review the results. After all the documentation, after all the assessments, you say, well, our actual risk may be higher than what we first thought because we realize our controls are no good. Or, actually, they're not as high as we thought because we have pretty good controls. So that's the benefit of doing the in-depth control, in-depth review for those points where you feel you want to do it. For instance, all the red points, I would do definitely an in-depth review. The medium points is at your discretion, which ones you want to go into more detail. But definitely review the results, give the business unit a chance to go back, discuss it with their business specialists. Is this the truth, how we represented the department, or did we get something wrong? And they can make changes, whatever they still required. But after that, they have to sign it off, important. Business unit has to put their signature on it and say, yes, this is our risk. It's not the risk department who says, what is your risk? It's the business unit who says, this is our risk. We stand by this, we sign this. They are responsible to manage it. Without signature of the business unit, I do not consider the RCSA complete. And once they do this, risk profile is updated with the results from the detailed analysis, and the information is passed to whoever needs to see it. For instance, the chief risk officer, the division head, head of audit maybe, CEO, CFO, whoever you feel should see this sort of information. So it's not something you do with a department, it's just between the two of you. This is something that's being published to people who need to know. And another thing which I hear quite often is we don't say anything because audit gets to see it, and then we have a bad audit report because we were honest and told us our weaknesses. That's completely wrong. The way it should be, and what I usually do when I work with a client, I strike a deal with audit. That your business is going to be honest, they'll disclose their weaknesses and they work on their weakness, but you are not allowed to punish them for it. Audit, however, is allowed to punish the business unit if they don't do the job they promised to do. If they say, yes, we will install additional controls by then and then, and nothing has happened, well, then audit must punish them. Simple as that. They can mention in the audit report there is a weakness, the business has identified it, business is working on it, full stop. No rating. But if they say the business promised to fix it by the end of last year and nothing has been done, bad mark. I think that's the way it should be, and it works well in those banks who have implemented that. And this is not limited to banks, this is limited to any sort of company. So the follow-up, obviously, address the action items with a deadline. Never says we'll do it. We'll do it by then and then. And if you cannot do it by then and then, you extend the deadline and give a reason why. Not just, haven't had the time. Doesn't work like that. Why didn't you have the time? Bad mark. Ongoing, of course, you don't want to do this risk assessment every 2-3 months. I know banks who do it every half a year, which I think is much too frequent. Every half a year becomes a paper exercise. People don't take it seriously anymore. I would say you should do this once a year. In the meantime, you take note of all those risk points which worry you, which you feel you need to monitor. And for this, you create indicators that show you how this risk point is moving, how it's behaving, if it's going up or down. That shows you how your risk profile changes. So, indicators, therefore, I can already tell you now, are not the solution. They are only a tool for you to work with. Okay, let's talk about key risk indicators, KRIs, as the market calls them. Personally, I don't like the word KRI, because I just like to call them indicators. Which indicator is key? For you, this indicator may be key, for that person is another indicator that's key. And for me, maybe none of them. And there's always the problem with some people arguing this is not a key risk indicator, this is a key performance indicator, a KPI. And then comes the controller and says, well, but no, this is a control indicator. And I say, well, I call it a KTI. What is a KTI? Anybody know? This is the indicator of the Chief Executive Officer, the CEO. It's a key trouble indicator. He doesn't care what kind of indicator it is. All he knows is he may spell trouble. Okay? So don't get hung up if somebody argues this is a KPI and not a KRI. Sure, it's a KPI. Sure, okay. For me, it's a KRI. I don't tell you. That's fine. Think of it that way. If you have a salesperson who brings in lots of new clients every week, other sales personnel are struggling to find one client a week, and this one comes with 20 clients a week. Great performance indicator for the salesperson. What does it tell you from a risk perspective? How does he do that? What does he promise them? So that may be a risk indicator for me as a risk manager. For the head of sales, fantastic, this guy is great. For a risk manager, we have a second look at how he does that. Alright, so what is a KRI? There are various definitions in the market. One of them says it is parameters which focus on certain business processes to predict upcoming changes in the operational risk profile. Yes and no. It's something that Dresdner Bank used to work with. They have changed their definition a little bit in the meantime. But this is something that has been published in various books because Gerrit-Jan van den Brink, the author there, he was an avid book writer and lecturer at one of the German universities. So it has, a lot of people are using this definition, although it's no longer in use at the bank itself. Why do we look at indicators? Any ideas? Why do we look at indicators? Any smart ideas? Or not so smart ideas? A prediction of risk? Yeah. Any other ideas? Yeah. To see where we are? Yeah. Status quo? Yeah. Any others? Do you have indicators at the bank? So to see whether the limits are. Sorry, can you repeat? Yeah. Okay. So you establish thresholds or limits, and when the limits have been reached, you have an indicator. Yeah, there is the limit. Okay. So you have a limit for the indicator saying this is the threshold. Okay. And the other reasons why anybody would look at indicators? Well, the former chief IT officer in DBS, he had an interesting view at that. He said is to avoid uninformed optimism. Okay, keep our fingers crossed. So what we want, we don't want to just say we have things under control because we don't know better. So we look at indicators to really know better, that we can say honestly we have things under control. I've been dealing with one bank, trying to get business from them for many years. Every time I hear, well, we have everything under control. Everything. We know what we're doing. We have it under control. The only problem is that bank is in the international headlines every other week with a major scandal. So what do they have under control? Nothing. Happens to be UBS. Nothing under control, but they claim that's uninformed optimism. Okay. The most important management tool is information. If you don't have information, you don't know nothing, you cannot manage. So you have real-time data and you have periodic data. If you're a market risk manager, you must have real-time data to see whether the markets are still within your limits. If you're an operational risk manager, very often periodic data are good enough. But all these data have one thing in common. They are real data, they are nothing with interpretation. You have to interpret these data. You have to make sense of the data. So, information is knowledge. Knowledge is power. Power is an advantage, and an advantage means money. And what is the ultimate solution? The ultimate formula here? Information is money. Okay? So, gathering information may be costly, but you will benefit in terms of revenues or fewer losses. But only, of course, if you do something with these data that you collect, if you know how to deal with them, and if you do something about it. So I always say, what's the point of knowing that it's dangerous crossing the road if you don't do anything about it? So we have three types of risk indicators. The first one is a leading indicator. That is before the problem has been generated. We look at sort of an early warning sign that something is not right. Something could go wrong.